Like, for example, I see a chocolate here, and my neuron fires, and my muscles tense up, and I grab the chocolate. And you know exactly that's going to happen. Maybe we don't know with the extent of our science right now, we can't predict everything that accurately, but is it
What
not
if
reasonable to
what if
decide
one of
that?
your nerves went wrong and you accidentally started kicking yourself in the nose?
That would be highly unlikely unless you have a nerve disorder.
And also, that would, what if the neuron was programmed to go wrong? Like maybe you could predict, maybe we can't predict it with the science we have now, but maybe in the future, it's possible. If we can predict exactly what a human's going to do in the next moment, then how can anything be free will? And I'm going to
If
talk
a
about the
tree falls
psychology
in
behind this later. Yeah, go ahead.
if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to see it, is it determined by fate?
Well, that's definitely an interesting philosophical argument, but how is that related to this?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, honestly.
I have a question.
I think it's a.
Yeah, one sec, Michael. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
So, has anyone tried to use the free will argument in a trial before?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to go into that. There's a very famous case of that. Anthony, do you want to finish your point? Okay, well, okay, so Sissy elaborates in the chat. For example, if you're going to make a purchase, it's mainly emotional. If you're going to a relationship, oftentimes people would say they couldn't help it. I don't think all of our choices go through our minds. Yeah, that's definitely a valid point. Maybe there's some things that are impulse driven, and maybe your impulse isn't your free will. However, maybe your mind also isn't your free will. Like, how do we know the difference between something that's an impulse and something in our mind? Like, maybe one is more easily observed, but when something goes through our mind, isn't it also like a series of neurons firing, and then it spreads through your nervous system or something? I'm not exactly sure exactly how it happens. And then maybe like your hand raises, and then you reach for something, and then you take it. Like, maybe that's all one complicated chain reaction. Okay. Finally, the third main side is compatibilism, and this one's really confusing, but I'm going to really quickly try to introduce it. Essentially, what compatibilism says is it's possible to have both libertarian free will and hard determinism. And there's a lot of nuances to the argument, but if I try to explain it, it would take like 20 minutes, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, we're going to go into four case studies of things that are very relevant to the free will debate. The first, I forgot who asked, I think it was Michael, asked if this was ever used in a trial. I'm not sure if you said that with this in mind, but it was definitely used in a trial. And this is in Clarence Darrow's trial defense. So if you recognize the name of Clarence Darrow, that might be because he was a lawyer, he was a defense attorney in the Scopes monkey trial. So y'all might have learned it in school. And also please stop spamming the chat, thanks. So essentially, in 1924, there were two Chicago teenagers, Loeb and Leopold, who kidnapped and murdered a boy named Bobby Franks for seemingly no reason. In court, Darrow, their defense attorney, argued that they had been influenced by their upbringing and family backgrounds to commit the murder. They showed a lack of emotions and had no other choice. In other words, they were predetermined to do the murder. Darrow's arguments actually successfully helped the teens avoid the death penalty, and instead they each got a life sentence. And I think one of them, I forgot if it was Loeb or Leopold, ended up dying in prison, but the other one ended up eventually getting out and trying to restart his life. So this case is important because it is one of the most high profile and also one of the first cases of someone using a determinist argument in court and actually winning. So my question for everyone, I have two questions. First question is, was the jury right in helping the teen avoid the death penalty? And second question is, how does this contribute to the free will debate? So I guess we can start with the first one. Was the jury correct? That may be true, Michael.
I think it's kind of weird because the jury technically, you could say that the jury were predetermined to make that to make that decision
That could be true.
because of free will, and it's just kind of scary.
It is kind of
'Cause,
scary, right?
I mean, the whole free will thing, I think I once read somewhere that if when people think about free will a lot, it decreases human efficiency or something.
Hmm.
I don't
Really?
know.
Well, I hope our efficiency isn't decreased by that. But it definitely free will has a lot of
Like-
implication on ethics, right? Like before we try to talk about we should do what is right. But the problem is, like, if we can't control our actions, then why should we care? Aren't we just going to do whatever we're going to do? And that's called fatalism, kind of. We're not going to go deeply into fatalism today, but that's essentially a preview of what that is. Isabel says, I think people's answers will depend on whether or not they support the death penalty, but I don't think they should have given them the life sentence for only that reason. Okay. Well, let's avoid the discussion on the death penalty. Let's just assume that Clarence Darrow was able to give them a lesser punishment. So ignore death penalty stuff, because that's a whole nother debate in itself, and we want to stay on topic. Tony says, I was predetermined to say, oh, well, that's kind of why determinism is so scary, right? Intellion asks, did Darrow know that the teens were influenced? Well, there was definitely a lot of evidence from the investigative reports, the psychologist study, I think, that the teens had absentee parents, they showed a notable lack of emotions, etc. So maybe it was possible. Alan Tong says, even if they were influenced, they still shouldn't have committed the murder. Okay, so do you think that the degree of influence matters? For example, you might think that this is a small influence, but what about a bigger influence? Like, what about if someone was raised in a society that normalized murder, and then they suddenly went into another society that doesn't normalize murder, and they kill someone? But could they have known better? Could they have done differently if they were raised in a society that is so different? You're typing? Okay, well, I'll give you time to type. I'll read everyone else's responses first. Ariel says, everyone has an influence, and it makes sense if it was because of a harsh upbringing. That's how bullies are formed. And Isabel says, I think it's a reasonable argument if it's due to actual mental problems due to their upbringing. Yeah, exactly. That must have been what the jury thought too, right? Most people are fortunate to have an okay upbringing, but for the people who don't, I mean, it really does have a big influence on them. But on the other side, there's also some problems with that argument. One problem is there's a lot of research that shows that I think if your parents are sexual abusers, I think you're more likely to do that in the future as well. And that's probably true. I mean, it makes sense intuitively. But the problem with that is that does that mean that we let them off the hook? Definitely not. So the question is, how do we deal with that? And how should we discuss that, I guess? So he says, I think that's why society has rules and restrictions, because you could technically do anything with free will. That's true, but do you think that the
Wait.
rules and restrictions? Hold on, let me finish, and then I'll let you talk. Do you think that the rules and restrictions, Sissy, should be applied differently to people who are raised differently or have different influences? Michael, go ahead.
You could technically say that every single criminal has probably a bad influence, and that's why they committed a crime, or maybe they had some mental problem like depression or something. So maybe that's why they committed a crime. So
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
I mean, because if they made this decision, maybe people would start using this
mental health shouldn't be used as a defense, because it's really easy to pull off mental health, because there's this video explaining how during the Paralympics the Spanish team there is a sport called like mentally impaired basketball, where like teams with mentally impaired people would do it, and the Spanish team had more than half of their team swapped in with not mentally impaired people. So it's really easy to fake yourself as mentally ill. And so being mentally ill should be a reason to die, After all, it wasn't them who suggested it. It was their attorney who suggested it. And it was their attorney who said it, not them,
Okay.
And they're paying the attorney money here. So I don't think I think they should have been shot or hung, because they randomly murdered someone and then paid a guy to get away with it. That's an obstruction of the justice system, and yeah, the mental health card shouldn't be played. It's just useless. I mean, not useless, but
I see what you mean. So you're kind of questioning the integrity of this point.
Yeah.
And I can see that. I definitely don't know for sure if Darrow's argument was right, and we can't really determine that because now it's probably this is like 100 years ago. It's hard to have that discussion in philosophy. So let's just assume that Darrow was true, that they really were raised in a bad household and they really were strongly influenced. Maybe they weren't forced to do it, but they were strongly influenced.
Well, then I still think that they're to blame. After all, they committed the murder. No amount of this fix that, because after all, like no matter how much you're influenced, it is you who makes that final decision. The neurons make that final spark to pull the trigger.
Okay. Well, what about this? And I see Isabel's points too. So I'm kind of I was going to say that too. I was going to say, what if we developed a psychological test that's 100% accurate? You 100% know exactly how influenced someone was and that stuff. So obviously we don't have that now. They didn't have that back in Darrow's case. But what if we develop that in the future? Then would your answer change?
Well, no, because it takes. I don't care even if it's 99% influence. He'd still need to get that 1%. He still has something in there. It's a long.
What happens if 100% influence?
There's a long series of events to murder someone. You gotta go find the person. Go conceive a murder weapon. You have to bring the murder weapon to the person and then beat the person to death, or do what you did to kill them, and then hire an attorney. Like a mentally ill person shouldn't be able to hire an attorney. Like if they were really so mentally ill, then why did they hire an attorney?
Maybe their parents hired an attorney.
Well,
maybe their parents hired it.
That's fair.
Also, just to jump in really quickly, there's definitely different types of mental illness. So it's possible that they're able to think clearly, but they just don't feel emotions, right?
Well, like either way though, it doesn't take emotion to know that A, you're breaking the law, B, it's quote unquote morally incorrect, and C, it's just a wrong thing to do.
Okay, I guess that's fair.
Can we move on?
One last comment on your point about not knowing what is quote unquote morally correct. I mean, how would they know?
Because like they're back in the 1920s, like people were getting hung for murder. They should have seen. From period. They may have been influenced, but they had the final call. Yeah.
Okay, fine, sure. Okay, yeah. I know we're spending quite a lot of time on this. I'm gonna really quickly read through the comments, and then we're gonna move on. And also, just for context, this is kind of similar to the insanity plea that's in courts right now. It's not common, but it's sometimes used. So Sissy says, I think the rules should be applied equally. There would be so many exceptions if they weren't applied equally. That's fair enough. Isabel says it's hard to make everything. Okay. They didn't ask the lawyer for proof. Period says.
Wait. I agree with what Annie said in the chat.
Okay, let me read that. sorry, there's a huge backlog of comments, so I'm really quickly reading through them. The teens were influenced by family to commit the murder. They should still not do it.
I'm saying like the one that says
Yeah, okay, I see it now.
talking about the one that says I don't think we have free will, but we shouldn't use that as an argument, or else the world wouldn't work.
Okay, I see that now. So Annie says, they don't have free will, but we shouldn't use it, or else the world wouldn't work. Some things should be predetermined. However, I believe that we are also controlled to live happily. Even if this murder was committed, the teenagers might have murdered, but in some way it made them happy in some sort of, okay, so they may have regret it, background influence, but it shouldn't be a valid argument. Okay, well, that's a bit that's definitely a good point. But the problem is, if we don't have free will, then what do you mean the world wouldn't work? Like, is it possible to do something that's bad if we don't have free will? Because we were probably
didn't have free will
anyway. Go ahead. Did someone say something?
If we didn't have free will, then what's the point of living? We can like keep on going, deciding what we want to do. If that isn't the case, then what we live for is always just not going to be true. It's not going to be right.
Yeah, that's one of the scary implications of free will. Okay, last comment I'm going to read is Isabel's, or not Isabel, Intellian's comment. The teens were influenced by family to commit the murder. Even though they were influenced by the family, they should still not commit murder. The teens did not murder Bobby for any reason, like killing his brother, but for no reason, just to do it because they were influenced. So it was also their fault they committed the murder. Okay, fair enough. I'll go back to you at the conclusion.
Did the parents or family get any punishment?
I'm not sure. Do you think they should have?
Well, like it depends, because like if their parents were like rich and seriously abused people, then abuse them on purpose. But like sometimes this thing happens because their parents can't bring them up, poor.
That's definitely true. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next point. The next interesting fact from psychology is Delgado's experiments on the brain. Jose Delgado, a Yale University scientist, discovered that stimulating various regions of the brain could cause all sorts of bodily motions, including frowning, the opening and closing of the eyes, and movement of the heads, arms, legs, and fingers. When he first tried using this on cats and monkeys, Delgado noticed that the animals showed no surprise or fear when their bodies moved. Apparently, they experienced the movements as voluntary. In one instance, stimulating a monkey's brain caused the monkey to get up and walk around. This effect was repeated several times, and each time the animal strolled around without surprise or discomfort, as if it had just decided to take a walk.
I already know what happened. It's like sort of like a mental nudge, like a mental nudge. Like it's in your brain. Take a walk. Like
what happened if you made a monkey do something you didn't know? Like you made a monkey do a hydraulic engineer.
Monkeys don't have that advanced limbs, but it's a psychological nudge, like the monkey. If that happened to a human, the human would probably be able to resist it because humans have more complex brains. But like,
oh no, they can't.
This was just like a general nudge towards like walk, and since monkeys like don't have a large amount of willpower, whereas their instincts are more wired towards
how dare you
see food, I must eat. It's like they see something, they do it. So they feel that mentally in their head they do it. Human reactions are more complex. Yeah, go ahead.
Wait, so like, I once saw a documentary where they did an experiment on people where they told them to use one hand to do something, and then they simulated a part of their brain which made them want to change to use the other hand to do it. And those people thought that changing their decision to use the other hand was their own decision, like their own voluntary decision.
I've seen that study too. It definitely has interesting ramifications or implications because how do we know we're not being controlled right now? So Anthony brought up an interesting point that's by saying that humans have more, or I think it was Anthony, maybe it was someone else, by saying that humans have more complicated brains than monkeys. But sure, it might be too complicated for us to manipulate with science now, or to fully manipulate. But what if, with very advanced technology, what if we could influence humans? In that case, that blurs